The Sanctuary of Eternal Paths had stood at the heart of the Cathari dominion for 12,000 years. Its walls were carved from living crystal that sang with the memories of every soul who had ever walked its corridors. Its doors, 777 of them, led to destinations that only the worthy could comprehend. Princess Valethsha, youngest daughter of Queen Morathiel, had been told since birth that she would never be worthy. "Your blood is diluted," her tutors had reminded her. "Your mother's second consort was of lesser lineage. You carry the stain of impurity." She was 12 cycles old, barely more than a child by Cathari standards, and she had already learned to hate the sanctuary. Every year the royal children were brought here for the choosing. Every year they walked through doors that led to glory, to knowledge, to power. Every year Valethsha was forbidden from participating. Until today. "The human delegation has arrived," her eldest sister Cathara announced, her voice dripping with contempt. "Mother wishes you to serve them refreshments. A fitting task for one of your station." Valethsha's 4 eyes burned with humiliation, but she bowed. "As the queen commands." The humans had come to negotiate mining rights in the outer territories, a minor diplomatic matter that the queen had delegated to her least important advisors. Valethsha had seen humans before, from a distance. They were small, fragile creatures with only 2 eyes and skin in various shades of brown and pink. They lived for barely a century. They had no telepathy, no precognition, no connection to the crystal harmonics that governed Cathari's civilization. They were, by every measure, insignificant. The delegation consisted of 3 diplomats and a single military escort. The soldier stood apart from the others, his posture rigid, his eyes constantly scanning the crystalline halls. He was older than the diplomats, perhaps 40 cycles by human reckoning, with gray threading through his dark hair and a face marked by lines that spoke of hardship. Valethsha approached with the ceremonial tray, keeping her gaze lowered as protocol demanded. "Refreshments," she said in the clumsy human tongue she had been forced to learn. "The queen welcomes you." One of the diplomats reached for a glass, but the soldier's hand caught his wrist. "Wait." His voice was quiet, controlled. "Let me." He took a glass, sniffed it, then set it aside without drinking. His eyes, brown, unremarkable, met Valethsha's for just a moment. "Thank you," he said. "What's your name?" No one had ever asked her name. Not outsiders. Not even most of her own people. "I am Valethsha. Sergeant Major Thomas Reed." He almost smiled. "That's a beautiful name." Before she could respond, the crystal walls began to sing. The choosing had begun. Valethsha knew she should return to her quarters. The choosing was not for her. But something drew her toward the sanctuary's central chamber. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps defiance, perhaps the desperate hope that she might catch a glimpse of what she would never experience. She found a shadowed alcove and watched as her sisters and brothers lined up before the doors. Each door glowed with a different color, a different frequency of crystal song. The worthy would feel the call of their destined path. They would walk through, and the door would reveal their future. Cathara chose first, as was her right. She walked through a door of blazing gold, and the crystals sang of conquest and empire. One by one, the royal children made their choices. One by one, they vanished into futures of power and privilege. And then Valethsha felt it. A pull, a whisper, a door calling her name. It was wrong. It was impossible. She was not part of the choosing. She had not been purified, had not received the queen's blessing, had not. The pull grew stronger. Before she understood what she was doing, Valethsha stepped out of the shadows. Before anyone could stop her, she was running toward the doors. "Stop her!" Guards moved to intercept, but Valethsha was small and fast and desperate. She dodged through the crowd, past her shrieking sisters, past the horrified advisors. She reached the doors, and she chose Wrong. The door she touched was not gold or silver, or any of the blessed colors. It was black, a darkness so complete that it seemed to swallow light itself. No royal child had ever chosen the black door. No royal child had ever survived touching it. The moment her hand made contact, the darkness surged forward and swallowed her whole. Sergeant Major Thomas Reed had been watching from the gallery reserved for foreign observers. He'd been a soldier for 22 years, had served in 3 interstellar conflicts, had seen things that would break most minds. But he had never seen a child run toward her own death with such desperate hope on her face. He was moving before conscious thought caught up with action. "Reed, what are you?" He ignored the diplomat's shout, ignored the guards converging on the central chamber, ignored every protocol that said a human had no business interfering in Kethari's sacred rituals. He saw only a child disappearing into darkness. And he followed. The darkness was absolute. Thomas couldn't see his own hands, couldn't hear anything but his own ragged breathing. The temperature had dropped, or risen, or ceased to have meaning entirely. He was somewhere outside normal space, somewhere the human mind wasn't designed to comprehend. But he had felt this before. Not exactly this, but close enough. The dissociation of deep space combat when the mind retreated from horrors it couldn't process. The void that swallowed soldiers who spent too long in cryosleep. The emptiness that waited at the edge of every battlefield, patient and hungry. Thomas had learned to walk through that darkness, had learned that the only way out was forward. He kept moving. "Hello?" His voice echoed strangely, multiplying and fragmenting. "Princess? Valethsha?" A sound. Faint. Somewhere ahead, if ahead had any meaning here. He followed it. The sound became clearer. Ragged breathing, choked sobs, the keening cry of a child who had realized she was utterly alone. Thomas found her curled into a ball, her 4 eyes squeezed shut, her pale blue skin almost gray with terror. "Hey." He knelt beside her, keeping his voice soft. "Hey, it's okay. I'm here." Her eyes flew open. You should not be here. This place is death. This place is, I know." Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand settled on her shoulder. "I know, but I'm here anyway. Why?" The word was raw, broken. "I am nothing. I am less than nothing. Even the darkness rejected me. It should have consumed me instantly, but instead it just left me here, alone." "The darkness didn't reject you." Thomas settled into a sitting position beside her. "It's testing you, waiting to see what you'll do." "How do you know?" "Because I've been tested before." He looked into the void around them. "When I was about your age, my home was destroyed. War, everyone I knew, gone. I spent 3 days hiding in the wreckage, convinced I was going to die." Valethsha's eyes widened. "What happened?" "A soldier found me. A woman named Sergeant Chen. She could have left me there. I was just a refugee kid, not her responsibility. But she didn't. She carried me out of the rubble, got me to safety, made sure I had food and shelter." Thomas paused. "She told me something I've never forgotten. She said, 'The darkness is real, the fear is real, but they're not the whole story. There's always a door out. You just have to keep looking until you find it. But there is no door here. There is nothing here. Then we make one.'" Valethsha stared at him. "You cannot. This is the void between paths. It exists outside the crystal harmonics. No Kethari has ever escaped it. Our legends say, with respect, Princess. I don't care what your legends say." Thomas stood, offering her his hand. "I care about getting you home. So, are you going to sit here and wait for the darkness to decide your fate? Or are you going to stand up and walk out with me?" For a long moment, Valethsha didn't move. Then, slowly, she took his hand. Walking through nothing was harder than Thomas had anticipated. There were no landmarks, no reference points, no way to know if they were making progress or walking in circles. The darkness pressed against them like a physical weight, whispering things that Thomas couldn't quite hear but that made his skin crawl. Valethsha stumbled beside him, exhausted and terrified but refusing to let go of his hand. "Tell me about your world," she said suddenly. "What? Earth? Tell me about it." "I need," she shuddered. "I need to think about something other than this." So Thomas talked. He told her about oceans that stretched beyond the horizon, about mountains that scraped the sky, about cities that glittered with light and forests that hummed with life. He told her about his childhood home, a small town in a place called Montana, where the winters were brutal and the summers were brief and the people were stubborn enough to love it anyway. He told her about his daughter. "Her name is Maria. She's about your age, I think. Maybe a little younger." His voice softened. "I haven't seen her in 2 years. This assignment, it was supposed to be my last. I was going to go home. Retire. Watch her grow up. Do you think you will?" Thomas squeezed her hand. "I'm planning on it." They walked for what felt like hours, or days. Time had no meaning in the void. Valethsha told him about her life, the constant humiliation, the sisters who treated her like a servant, the mother who pretended she didn't exist. She told him about her dreams of being chosen, of proving that she was worth something, of finding a place where she belonged. "I thought the door was calling me," she whispered. "I thought, for one moment, that maybe I was special after all. But I was wrong. I chose the door of death, the door that no one survives. Maybe you didn't choose wrong." "What do you mean?" Thomas had been thinking about this. "You said no one has ever escaped the void between paths. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. Maybe it just means no one has ever tried the right way. And what is the right way? I don't know yet." He looked down at her, this small, frightened, desperate child who reminded him so much of Maria. "But I know it starts with not giving up." Ahead, impossibly, miraculously, a light appeared. The light was faint at first, just a spark in the infinite darkness. But it grew as they approached, resolving into something that made Valethsha's breath catch. A door. Not the black door that had swallowed them. This door was made of pure white crystal, singing with a frequency that Valethsha had never heard, a harmony so complex and beautiful that it made her hearts ache. "That's..." She stopped walking, her grip on Thomas's hand tightening. "That's the door of transcendence. It's supposed to be a myth, a legend. It leads to where? Everywhere. Nowhere. The stories say it leads to understanding, to seeing the truth of all things." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "No one has ever found it. The seekers spent millennia searching. They believed it would reveal the purpose of our existence." Thomas studied the door. "Well, we found it. Let's see what's behind it." "Wait." Valethsha pulled back. "I cannot. This door, it is not for me. I am impure. You're a child who walked into darkness because she wanted to matter." Thomas knelt to meet her eyes. "You've survived things that would have broken most adults. You didn't give up when the void tried to swallow you. You kept walking, even when there was no hope." He touched her chin gently, tilting her face up. "Whatever is behind that door, you've earned the right to see it." Tears streamed down Valethsha's face. "But my blood, your blood doesn't define you. Your choices do." Thomas stood, offering his hand again. "Your tutors, your sisters, your mother, they all told you that you weren't worthy. They were wrong, and I think it's time you showed them exactly how wrong they were." Valethsha looked at the door, looked at Thomas, looked at the darkness that had tried to consume her and failed. She took his hand. Together, they walked through. The light was blinding at first, a radiance that seemed to penetrate every cell of Thomas's body. Then it softened, and he found himself standing in a chamber of impossible beauty. Crystals of every color rose around them like a frozen garden, each one singing a different note of a harmony that encompassed everything Thomas had ever felt: joy and sorrow, hope and despair, love and loss, all woven together into something that transcended individual emotion. And in the center of the chamber stood a figure. It was Kethari in shape, but its form seemed to shift and flow like living light. Its eyes, all 6 of them, held the depth of ages. "Well," the figure said, its voice resonating through the chamber, "this is unexpected." Valethsha fell to her knees. The first singer, the creator of the crystal harmonics, the legend, is standing before you, yes. The first singer's gaze moved to Thomas. "And you brought a human." "Fascinating." Thomas didn't kneel. He wasn't sure his knees would support him if he tried. "We're just trying to find a way home." The first singer moved closer, studying Thomas with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. "You walked through the void between paths. No Kethari has ever done this. Our minds cannot survive the emptiness. We are too dependent on the crystal harmonics, too connected to the greater consciousness. But you," a sound that might have been laughter, "you humans carry your own harmony, your own song. You don't need the crystals because you have something stronger. And what's that?" The first singer smiled. "Hope. An unreasonable, illogical, magnificent hope. The belief that things can be better, even when all evidence suggests otherwise." The ancient being turned to Valethsha. "This child chose the black door because she hoped it would lead somewhere better than the life she knew. And you followed her because you hoped you could save her. Hope drove you both through a void that has consumed thousands of Kethari minds." Valethsha looked up. "But I am impure. My blood, your blood is irrelevant." The first singer's voice sharpened. "I created the crystal harmonics to help my people evolve. Instead, they used them to build hierarchies, to declare some worthy and others not, to twist my gift into chains." Disgust flickered across the ancient face. "You, child, carry more of my original vision in your little finger than your entire bloodline carries in their crystalline palaces. I don't understand. The choosing was never meant to sort the worthy from the unworthy. It was meant to reveal truth, to show each soul the path they most needed to walk." The first singer gestured, and images appeared in the crystalline walls. Valethsha's sisters walking through their golden doors, their faces smug with inherited privilege. "Your sisters chose paths of conquest and power because that is all they can imagine. They will achieve great things by Kethari standards, and they will never understand what those achievements truly cost." The images shifted to Valethsha, running toward the black door. "You chose the door of transformation. The door that strips away everything false and leaves only truth. You chose it because some part of you knew that the life you were living was a lie, and you would rather face annihilation than continue pretending." The first singer knelt, meeting Valethsha's eyes. "That is not impurity, child. That is courage." Thomas watched the exchange, something tight loosening in his chest. He had carried so much weight for so long, the weight of command, the weight of decisions that cost lives, the weight of being so far from home and everyone he loved. The first singer turned to him. "And you, human, you have carried your own weight. I'm a soldier. It's the job. It is more than that." The ancient being's eyes seemed to look through him. "You have lost much. You have caused loss. You carry guilt that you believe you can never atone for." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I do what's necessary." "Yes, and you hate yourself for it. You hate that you have become someone who can make the necessary choices without flinching." The first singer's voice softened. "But you also save children. You walk into darkness for those you do not know. You carry hope even when you believe you have none left. Your people confuse us." The first singer rose, spreading arms that seemed to encompass the entire chamber. "You are fragile. You are brief. You have none of the gifts that we consider essential to civilization. And yet, When we study your history, we find something that terrifies us. What? You survive? The ancient being's voice dropped. Empires rise and fall around you. Catastrophes that would break other species barely slow you down. You adapt. You persist. You hope. A pause. We have watched 1,000 species reach for the stars and fail. You are still reaching. And you help others reach alongside you, even when it costs you everything. Thomas thought of Sergeant Chen, pulling him from the rubble. Thought of the countless hands that had reached for him over the years, and the hands he had reached out in return. That's just being human, he said finally. Yes. The first singer smiled. It is. And it is more powerful than you know. The return was instantaneous. One moment Thomas was standing in the crystal chamber with Valethsha. The next, he was back in the sanctuary of eternal paths, the black door sealing behind them with a sound like thunder. The chamber had not changed. The guards still stood frozen in mid-stride. The royal children still gaped in horror. Queen Morathiel still sat on her crystal throne, her 6 eyes wide with something that might have been shock or fury. Only seconds had passed, but everything was different. Valethsha stood taller than she ever had before. Light seemed to cling to her skin, not the harsh radiance of the crystal harmonics, but something softer, warmer. Her 4 eyes blazed with a clarity that made the guards step backward. And she was not alone. The child lives, someone whispered. The door of death. She survived. Silence. Queen Morathiel rose from her throne, her presence filling the chamber like a physical weight. She descended the crystal steps, her gaze fixed on Valethsha with an intensity that made Thomas's hand drift toward his sidearm. You violated the sanctity of the choosing. The queen's voice was ice. You touched a door that was not yours to touch. You brought an outsider into our most sacred space, you mother. The word cut through the queen's tirade. Valethsha stepped forward, and Thomas saw something in her posture that hadn't been there before. Certainty. I chose the black door because it called to me. I survived the void between paths because I was not alone. And I stood before the first singer. Gasps erupted through the chamber. The queen's face went pale. Who told me that everything you've taught me is a lie? You dare. The bloodlines are meaningless. Valethsha's voice rang through the chamber. The hierarchy is a corruption. The choosing was never meant to separate the worthy from the unworthy. It was meant to help us find truth. And the truth is that you've built an empire on fear and exclusion, and called it sacred. Queen Morathiel's hand rose, crystal energy gathering at her fingertips. You will be silent, child, or I will silence you permanently. Thomas stepped forward. I wouldn't do that. The queen's eyes snapped to him. You are the reason this happened. You followed my daughter into the void. I followed a child who was running toward death because she thought it was better than the life you gave her. Thomas's voice was quiet, but it carried. I've seen a lot of terrible things in my life, Your Majesty. Wars, genocides. The worst that sentient beings can do to each other. But I've never seen anything as cruel as what you've done to your own daughter. You understand nothing of our ways. I understand that you told a 12-year-old that she was worthless because of who her father was. I understand that you let her believe she was impure, unworthy, less than nothing. I understand that when she finally worked up the courage to reach for something more, your first instinct was to destroy her for it. Thomas held the queen's gaze. I understand plenty. She broke our most sacred laws. Your laws are wrong. Silence fell. No one spoke to the queen of the Kethari Dominion like this. No one. Certainly not a human. Certainly not a member of a species classified as barely sentient. Queen Morathiel's hand trembled with barely contained power. I could kill you where you stand. You could. Thomas didn't move. But it won't change what happened. It won't change what your daughter saw. It won't change the fact that your entire civilization has been built on a foundation of lies. And now someone knows the truth. One child's delusions. The first singer spoke to her. Thomas let that hang in the air. The creator of your crystal harmonics, the being you've worshipped as a god for 12,000 years. It told Valethsha that she carries more of its original vision than your entire bloodline combined. The chamber erupted. Advisors shouted. Guards looked to each other in confusion. The royal children stared at their youngest sister with expressions ranging from disbelief to dawning horror. "You lie," the queen hissed. "I was there. I heard every word." Thomas finally smiled, a thin, tired expression, and I'm not the only one who knows. The first singer is still out there, beyond the door of transcendence. Anyone who has the courage to walk through the void can find it. Anyone who's willing to face the darkness can learn the truth. He looked around the chamber at the assembled Cathari, the elite, the privileged, the ones who had built their lives on the assumption that they were inherently superior. The question is, how many of you have that courage? The aftermath was chaos. Thomas was detained, then released, then detained again. Diplomatic channels exploded with demands and counter-demands. The human delegation was alternately threatened with execution and offered unprecedented trade agreements. Through it all, Valethsha refused to leave his side. "You should be with your people," Thomas told her, during one of the brief moments when they were left alone. "You're going to change everything. I should be where I choose to be." Valethsha looked up at him with those 4 brilliant eyes. "You taught me that. You taught me that I am not what they say I am. That my choices define me, not my blood." That was just the truth. She took his hand, a gesture that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. "When I was in the darkness, I was ready to give up. I was ready to let it consume me. And then you came. A human. A species we have dismissed as primitive and worthless. You walked into a void that has killed thousands of my people, and you did it without hesitation. For me, a child you had known for less than an hour." Thomas's throat tightened. It was the right thing to do. Yes, and that is what makes it remarkable. Valethsha squeezed his hand. "Among my people, the right thing is rarely done. We calculate, we strategize, we protect ourselves. We would never risk everything for a stranger. The cost-benefit analysis would never justify it. Maybe that's why the first singer was so interested in humans. Maybe." Valethsha smiled, the first real smile Thomas had seen from her. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe hope is just better, even when it's unreasonable, even when it defies logic. Maybe the willingness to try, even when failure seems certain, is the most valuable thing in the universe. Thomas left the Dominion 3 weeks later, after the diplomatic crisis had been resolved and the first tentative reforms had begun. Queen Morathiel had not been deposed, not yet, but her power had been shattered. The revelation about the first singer had spread too far to be contained. Questions were being asked. Doors that had been sealed for millennia were being opened. Valethsha came to see him off. "I wish you could stay," she said, standing at the shuttle dock. She looked different now. Not just older, but more present, more real. The light that had clung to her since the door of transcendence had not faded. "There is so much work to do, so much to rebuild. That's your work, not mine." Thomas knelt to meet her eyes one last time. "You're going to do amazing things, Princess. You're going to tear down walls that have stood for 12,000 years. You're going to give hope to everyone who was ever told they weren't worthy. Because of you." "No." He shook his head. "Because of you. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through." Valethsha threw her arms around him, another gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Thomas held her gently, remembering his daughter, remembering Sergeant Chen, remembering everyone who had ever believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. "Will I see you again?" Valethsha whispered. "Maybe. The galaxy's a big place, but it has a way of bringing people back together." He pulled back, hands on her shoulders. "But even if we don't, remember what you learned. Remember that the darkness doesn't have the final word. Remember that hope is stronger than fear. I will. Tears streamed down her face. I promise. Thomas boarded the shuttle. As it lifted off, he watched the sanctuary of eternal paths shrink below him, that ancient monument to hierarchy and exclusion, now cracking at its foundations. The Queen's child had chosen the wrong door. By every measure of Kethari tradition, it should have killed her. But a human soldier had opened it. And sometimes, that made all the difference. Epilogue. Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of the Kethari Dominion, they would point to many factors. The revelation of the first singer's true intentions, the courage of Princess Valethsha, the reform movements that swept through crystalline cities. But those who knew the full story pointed to something else. They pointed to a moment when a child ran toward death, and a stranger followed her into the dark. They pointed to hope, unreasonable and magnificent, walking where logic said nothing could survive. They pointed to a human soldier who saw a child in trouble and didn't calculate the cost, didn't consider the consequences, didn't ask whether she was worthy of saving. He just opened the door. Whoa.